Hello and welcome back to I'm going to teach you how to knit. It's me and this is my knitting. I'm sorry that it took so long to record this video. I recorded an entire different video and then had issues with storage on my phone. So we're here and we're doing this for real this time. Updates in last time, I finished this. It's done. Now I have to wash it and you'll know why later. But anyway, I am going to try to give you a more condensed version of the thing that I filmed yesterday because I talked so much for so long that I gave myself a migraine. So we're not going to do that today, but I do want to teach you today the basics of knitting. So how to make stitches so that you can start to practice, and also tell you about what you are going to want to buy. And then I'm going to preview some of the topics that I want to talk about in my next video, which I think will be helpful for as you develop your initial knitting skills for you to keep in mind. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is supplies. Obviously, the first supply that everyone thinks about is yarn, but honestly, you can learn to knit on literally anything, as I've shown previously when I used chopsticks and cooking twine to knit on my Instagram stories. So theoretically you could do this to learn. Obviously I don't recommend for any like projects. But the first thing that I want to talk about actually is needles. Let's try to make this fast but clear. First thing, these are not needles. These are crochet hooks. If you see a thing and it has this little hook nub at the end, this is not for knitting. This is a completely different sport activity. These are useful to have in knitting. Every now and then you can use them for fixing things, especially a smaller one like this. But these are for crochet. So not this. These are not needles. These are hooks. When you do think of needles, you probably think of something like these, which are ridiculously long. These are from my grandmother's collection that I inherited. As you can tell, these are freaking enormous. But these are knitting needles, right? These are the standard knitting needles. So on the one end, they have this like stopper, and on the other end is the side that you use to knit on. These are like longer than my arms, I think. Here it'll tell you what size it is. Something that you should note is that there's two kind of standard sizes for all knitting needles. There's like the millimeter size, which this doesn't make any sense. That's not a 6.5 millimeter. That doesn't make any sense. I have no idea why this is labeled like that. Oh, I think my grandmother probably stuffed these into the wrong. Anyway, so it'll say millimeters and then it'll say a number size. These are from Argentina. So don't pay attention to these sizes, okay? This size is like massive, is what the size is. But there's a US number size typically, and then there's like a millimeter size. This is a lie. This is not the case for this. But those sizes are important because, as I'll get into in a bit, they determine what your final product is gonna look like. So here's another set from my grandmother's collection. You see they look a little different with the nubby end, but same concept. Pointy on one end, nubby on the other side, and they have a size. Which I also don't think that this is that. I think Argentina must have a different number system than the United States and Europe, which I knit mostly in English. So, but you can tell, right? These are two completely different sizes, and as I will go into detail in a bit, the size of the needle is one of the big factors in determining what your finished product looks like. So these are standard straight knitting needles. We have other kinds of knitting needles. There's three types, I would say. The next type is these. These are known as double pointed needles. You'll notice that unlike these, they don't have a nub on either end. They're just sticks, pointy sticks on either side. And that's because these are used to knit in the round, which is to knit tubes. So if you're like, what is that? You see how this is just like a circle? I am like reaching so far here. This was knit in the round. So that's like a tube. And you could use these needles to do that. Now, these needles are from the US. These are my needles. I hate knitting in the round with double pointed needles, so I barely use these. But you'll see, they come in a set of 5 because knitting in the round requires, if you're using double pointed needles, it's at least 3 needles that you need. And you'll see that on the side here, it has the size. So these are 4mm needles. That's why when this said 6.5, I was like, that's a freaking lie. These are 4mm needles. They don't seem to have the US size on here. But you can look up online like 4mm and transfer it to the US size. So these are the double pointed needles, and we'll just lay those here. And then the last kind of needles are cable needles. So these are my favorites because they're multi-use. So you see here, right, we have a pointy side, but we also have the side where it just turns into this really long cable. The cable is for a couple of things. It's mostly, well, it's not for a couple. It is for knitting in the round, like that, right? So if you don't want to use double pointed needles, you can use cable needles to knit in the round. I'm not going to go over knitting in the round yet because you need to, that's a couple steps too far. But the good thing with cable needles is that effectively you can use them the same as these, which we'll get into in a second, how you even use needles. But you can get cable needles and use them as if they are non-cable needles, just like this. However, I would still start with these needles, these kinds, the straight ones. And again, with cable needles, you'll see that there's different sizes in the actual needles, just like with all the other needles. So here's some thicker ones, here's a thinner one, and you'll find here on the side somewhere it should say, hello, here it says the brand Chiagu, it says there's US size 9. See, there we go. We have a US size 9. These are 5.5mm. So, right, we saw these ones. These ones say that they're 4mm. So these ones are thinner than the cable ones. And that's pretty evident, right? If you get a needle and you're like, it doesn't say anywhere what size it is, there are some little like tools. They're just like little things like this, and they have a bunch of little holes in different diameters, and you just literally, like, I can't find mine, but you just like shove, like a toddler, you shove your needle into the hole until it fits perfectly, and it'll be like, this one's a size 6, or this one's a 7mm or whatever. And that's how you can tell the width or the size of your needle. With cable needles, one important thing is the length of the cables. It doesn't matter if you're using the cable needles as if they were like normal straight needles. But when you are making something big like a sweater, like there are some cable needles where the cable is like that long. And that's the whole thing. It's just like this. Most of my cable needles have pretty long cables. But so for example, these ones that we looked at before, you see how these ones are skinny. Also the cable is, oh actually these cables are like pretty much the same size. What about this one? Aha, this cable is longer, you see? So this third one that I added, the needle size is like still pretty similar to these, but the cable is much longer. I would always just get the longer cable, but again, you shouldn't worry about these yet. So these are the 3 different types of needles that you're gonna find. Just get a pair of normal knitting needles to start with, and then you can branch out and get into this mess later. Yes. And when you're like, if you're like, oh, what size do I get? Get whatever's the freaking cheapest. Just get one. I would say get like a size, what the hell was this again? This is a US 9. I would get like a US 11, which should be, how many millimeters are you? Hello, 5.5. Get like a 6 or 7. US 11, US 12 or something, just because it's gonna look like this, so it's gonna be like much easier to hold in your hands. The tinier the needle, the more like arthritic that you get, and the more it's like, and it's like, it's hard to learn on that. So get something like this, just a normal needle, long, has the nub on the one end, the non-nub on the other one. this is much easier for learning how to knit and make sure that it's a kind of this kind of width. So like 7 millimeters, US 11, that kind of thing. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is yarn. Obviously, I'm sure that you know that yarn comes in different colors. Examples A and B here. But another thing that people don't know is that yarn comes in different weights. And I don't mean weight as in how much yarn and the density and whatever the hell. Yarn weight refers to basically the thickness of the yarn. So let me show you some examples. This yarn, I don't remember what I used it to do. This yarn has kind of a thicker weight on the end of yarns, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So you can see here, like relative size to like my fingers, it's decently thick. It's not the thickest thing that you've ever seen. However, so this is the yarn that I used to make this sweater. And let's see if we can entangle it a bit. And if we put them side by side, you can tell that they are very different thicknesses. The purple one is a lot thinner than the pink one. It gets worse. So this yarn, I don't even know, here we go. Here's the end of it. This yarn is even thinner, as you can see here. Look at that, that barely shows up because it's so thin. So the thickness of the yarn is the other big thing that you need to take into account when you're thinking of projects. When you start knitting, I would recommend going with the thicker yarn, just like I recommended going with thicker needles. Also, I would not recommend going for like a super fancy yarn either. Like, don't be like, for my first project, I will do cashmere. Just get some shit, okay? Like, I don't think this is complete shit. I don't remember what this is. I think that this might be merino. This also might just be acrylic. I have no idea anymore. But for your first one, do something like acrylic or just like a plain wool or something. Don't go fancy. For my mom's first one, this yarn is from a site called Knit Picks. For your first few projects, and honestly, even after that, Knit Picks is a really great site. The yarn is it's good quality, it's low in price, they have good color options, and something like this one was called Cotlin, C-O-T-L-I-N, which is a mix of cotton and linen, is really nice because A, it's really good for sensitive skin. I have really sensitive skin. B, it's good for warmer climates. My mom lives in a very hot climate, so knitting her something which is cotton and linen, which is very breathable and lightweight. And C, it's not rough on your hands. So cotton by itself tends to be a little bit more scratchy, ironically. So mixed with linen, it's really enjoyable to knit with. And you'll learn what I mean when you start knitting with things like this, which is a huge pain in the ass to knit with because it starts like getting stuck on other things because it's so tiny and fluffy. But yeah, something like this, like a cotton linen or an acrylic is a good idea, but try to go for thicker yarns. This probably is like what's known as an Aran weight or something that's on the thicker end. But basically there's an entire like grading scale to yarns, and it starts with what's known as lace weight. I'm pretty sure this would be considered lace weight. It's super, super thin, and it goes all the way up to like super bulky, which is very bulky. It's very fat. I don't know. So get something on the thicker side just because it's much easier to learn with, and also it like knits up much quicker. Yeah, and get yourself a fun color. Just get a little fucky color for the first time, and it becomes a lot more fun. So let's move on to the next round. Okay, so before we talk about actually how to knit, we're going to talk about a few more things. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, how do we call this? Kind of the structure of knitting, but not the structure of knitting. We're not going to talk about the structure of knitting. We're going to talk about the relationship between the weight of the yarn and the size of the needle. So it's a ratio, right? This sweater was made with a particular size needle and with a particular weight of yarn. And if I had made it with changes in either of those, it would have looked completely different. So let's start with this example that I made for you. You will see that these two parts look completely different. But here's the fun part. What if I told you that they are the same exact yarn? Because they are. It's the same exact yarn. And the same amount of rows and stitches per area. So this is a 10 by 8, but this down here is also a 10 by 8. Count them. Do it. It's the same thing. And the only difference that I have here is the size of the needles. So the bottom part is knit with these super, super tiny little needles, which I can't even, like, what size are you? I can't tell. I can't tell what size they are, but I can tell that this needle is bent. That's not good. Anyway, these super tiny needles made the bottom part, and you can tell, right? Like, very, very tight weave, a very tight knit. The top part was made with these fat boys, and you can tell because it's knit really loosely. So you can tell, right, there's a relationship between the size of the yarn and the size of the needles. The needles comprises the negative space in a knit, whereas the yarn comprises the positive space. So the yarn is what is taken up, and then the needle size is what is between. With the fat needles, you are holding a larger space for nothing, right? Each one of these loops had a fat needle in it, which means when you take it out, it's got a larger space for nothing. And then down here, we had almost no space for the negative space, you know? And so when we took the needles out, you can't shove. I could probably shove one of my fingers in here. I cannot shove anything down here. So this affects different qualities of the garment. Obviously, it's a different look, but also you can tell this bottom part is a lot stiffer. It's very, very structured. It holds its shape very well. Whereas the top part is floppy. That's sometimes a bad thing. Like if I were to make, I don't know, if I want something with structure, the bottom is much better. But the top part is really good for if you want like a nice drape, if you have something that's like going over the curves of your body, or, you know, like a decorative object or something, you might want it to be more floppy. They're also completely different styles. So I would say this feels a bit more like straight-laced and formal, whereas this feels a lot more like playful and casual. So just the needles gives you a completely different vibe. Then we're going to talk about I should have talked about this in the first place. But anyway, this one is the difference in the weight of the yarn. So you can tell there's slightly different weights. And I also, don't look at this too much. I fucked up a little bit here. I didn't do it right because I wasn't paying attention. I was watching TV. So anyway, here we started with the same exact yarn as I did down here on a third size of needle. By the way, this part was made same exact yarn as here, but an in-between size of needle. So you can already tell it's a lot looser than this part and a lot tighter than this part. And I would say this is more of an appropriate needle size for this weight of yarn. And down here, all I did was I changed the weight of yarn that I was using. I mean, you can also tell if there's a color difference. But, like, look at it. This is, it's because I did part of it backwards. So let's do it like that. So you can tell here that the more pink yarn is a thicker weight than the more purplish yarn. And you can tell how that made a much smaller, and again, just like with over here, this is the same amount. This is a 8 by 10, and then this is an 8 by 10. And you can tell how much smaller the smaller yarn, the smaller weight yarn produced, like a much smaller area of yarn, right? And the same is here, right? Like these are the same amount of stitches that I knit, but the tighter one produces a much smaller surface area than the one with a larger needle. So like smaller needle, smaller surface area, larger needle, larger surface area. Here, it's thinner yarn, like thinner weight yarn, smaller surface area, thicker weight yarn, larger surface area. And again, this is the difference in the positive space this is a difference in the negative space. And these are really, really influential when deciding what you're going to knit and what the look of the final product is going to be. Is this relationship between the thickness of the yarn and the width of the needle. When you're first starting out, it doesn't matter. Like when you're first starting out, just make something, okay? Just make stuff and learn to make good stitches and learn to not fuck up all your work and learn to undo your mistakes. But this is something that I think is good to know from the get-go, because it took me a really long time to understand why we had all of these different needles sizes and yarn weights. And I think it's just good to know from the very beginning what difference these two factors make in your finished product, so that once you move forward from the I make mistakes in every single row phase, you can start to think about what you want to do next and start thinking about what properties you want that thing to have, and then figure out what yarn and needle size you need for that. Now, one really important thing to talk about though is that I don't make this stuff based on my imagination. I did not design this sweater. I made a couple of like updates to it based on my own preferences and my prior knowledge, but this is a pattern that I bought online. And I talked about this on my Instagram, but most people are not making knitted stuff and pulling that information from their own ass. This is something that a professional knitwear designer designed online, and then she wrote up a pattern. It has something like 10 different sizes, which is something that we've been seeing more now in the knitting community, is a lot more size inclusivity. And then you buy the pattern. The good thing is once you buy the pattern, you own the pattern. Like, don't go, obviously, do not go like sending that pattern to people. That's like very frowned upon, not only illegal, but like very frowned upon, because these people work really, really hard to design these patterns. But it's yours to keep. So I can make this same sweater. I can make it in a completely different yarn, and I can make it on completely different needles if I felt like it. And it would totally change what the sweater looked like. Or I can use the exact same yarn, the exact same size of needles, and I can make 10 of these, and it's totally fine. So that this pattern is, you know, I will keep this for the rest of my life. I will probably, I mean, I really enjoyed knitting it and I really like how it looks. So I'm probably going to make myself one of these. But, you know, it's not like I am like taking this and going like, like, oh yes, I would like a very loose weave, whatever the hell. But more like, this is what pattern designers are thinking about when they're designing different patterns. And so this is something that you will think about when you are looking at things that you want to knit in the future. I will talk about how to find patterns in a bit, but first I think we should just talk about how to knit stuff. So let's do that. Okay, so we're gonna start to knit now. I'm gonna use actually the yarn that I just used to knit my mom's sweater, and I'm gonna use these cable needles because I actually really hate working with super long needles because it requires a lot more arm work. And if you know anything about me, it's that I have problems with my spinal cord, and it affects my arms, and therefore I don't really like doing stuff with my arms. Okay, so instead I like doing stuff with my hands. We're gonna do stuff with my hands. We're gonna do knitting with these things. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do is you have to do this thing called casting on. Casting on is how you get the needles to stay on, how you get the yarn to stay on the needles in the first place. Yarn on needles is in the form of stitches. That makes no sense, but let me show you. Oh God, why are you so far? Okay, so this is a thing that I am currently knitting a swatch for, and you're like, what's a swatch? I will explain later. But you can see here, yeah, there we go. You can see here that this whole thing is attached to the cable, or the needles, with these little loops. Every single one of these little loops is a stitch. And this stitch, as you knit every single one, will turn into your fabric. You see, I go through, I knit all of this, and it turns into my fabric. The thing to know is that you gotta get the stitches on there. You know, how did I go from there was string and a needle and I turned it into this? The answer is casting on. So I'm gonna scratch my eyeball right here because it's very itchy. And now we're gonna cast on. So I actually only know one method of casting on. There are several. I don't know the other ones. Apparently this one is like a very good one. My grandmother taught me this method. She was like, this is the only method you will ever need. She was kind of right. I've heard a lot of other people apparently learn this method as like their second or third method that they used. And so they were like, oh, like, I love this method. It's great. Wish I'd known this before. So I'll just teach it to you now. Why wait? Okay. So there's two components to yarn that you need to understand. And the dividing factor is what's on your needles. And it's going to be this is kind of like DNA with the lagging strand and the leading strand. I just realized that's fun. Anyway, so this is the working yarn is whatever yarn that is like more attached to your ball. And then the tail is whatever yarn is not attached. Right now, it's all one thing. Okay? But I'm going to be referring to the end that is loose as the tail and the end that is attached to the ball as the working yarn. So unravel some of your ball, and then basically what we're going to do is we are going to take our needle and we are going to wrap this thing around by the amount of stitches that we want to put on a needle. If your question is how many stitches am I supposed to put on a needle, my answer is it depends. If you're following a pattern, the pattern will tell you, it'll say cast on 20 stitches. And so you will cast on 20 stitches on this needle. Currently, we're not following a pattern. A good rule of thumb is 20 for just like practice. However, I don't want to do that. That's too many. So I'm going to do, we're going to do 6. Okay, so for every stitch that you want to cast on, my rule is I wrap this around twice. So if we're doing 6, we're doing 12 wraps. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, more or less. So basically this tells me I need to have a tail of about this long. So go a little bit longer because I'm paranoid. At least that long will be good. That is to know how much of a tail you need. The next step is actually making the first knot. It's a slip knot. If you're smart and know how to make a slip knot, congratulations, do that. If you're not, peace sign with your hands facing yourself, or rather your thumb is facing yourself. Drape the yarn with the tail away from you and the working yarn part towards you, towards your thumb. What direction is this? Counterclockwise, you're right. Counterclockwise to the tail and do that. Make one more wrap, that thing. And then, right. And then take the tail one more time. This isn't going to be enough. Okay, make more space because my fingers are fat. And then, yes, okay. The tail's away from you. The working yarn is towards you. You drape it over. You wrap once fully. And then you go for another half wrap. And you make a loop. Do you see how I'm going? I don't know how to explain this. This is so like muscle memory to me that it's very hard to explain. And then you take the tail one more time and you pull it through the middle. Not all the way, just enough to make a loop. You see this loop? Make put needle. Make put needle, pull. Make put needle, pull. Okay? It's going to be something like this. Pull all the way tight. Not super tight. Snug. snug. You see this? Snug. So on the one end, you have the working yarn, which may or may not be on the right side. And, oh, sorry, no, this is the working yarn. Sorry, and this is the tail. Sorry, I've been filming for like an hour. I'm starting to get really tired. Okay. Once you've made a relative slip knot of some proportion, that I promise this is the part that I am like least good at explaining. We're going to make the peace sign again. Now, some of you are going to be like, oh my God, but my tail's on the left side. You know what? I know. Sometimes this is the part that I have the most trouble with. Okay, listen, just if it doesn't work, just do it again. Okay, I promise this is the part that I suck at the most in teaching. Okay, peace sign again, right? Thumb facing you. Pick up the tail. This time with the tail end facing you and your thumb. Okay? Make into loop, right? You see loop? Put loop over. You see? Loop goes over like this. Needle. Then working yarn. Also, what direction is this? Counterclockwise wrap around needle. Yes, yes. Take right hand loop, put over top. Pull snug, not tight, snug. We do again closer. Peace sign with tail towards you. Make loop. Take loop. Make this thing. Take working yarn. Counterclockwise wrap. Right loop, go over. Pull snug. Do various times. Okay, do various times. Do certain number of times. And then when you've done it, do it all over again. Like undo it and do it all over again. Number 1, because undoing it is very satisfying. Number 2, because you need to practice this. This is like one of the most essential parts. How many did we say we were going to do? 6, 10? I don't know. I've stopped counting. Okay, it's not important. I've done X number of stitches. And now we have cast on. How many stitches? Look at them. God, why? Hello? Ah, wow, look at that focusing. Okay, so how many stitches? 1, 2, 3. This is why nails are important. 4, fuck. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, those are 8 stitches on my needle. 8 stitches. Ready? Okay, now, look, I told you. Tail, working yarn, good. Tail, useless, evil, don't care about. Working yarn, good, only use. Okay, take needle. Maybe your needles are not attached. Mine are. Rearrange the way you're sitting because it hurts. Yes. Needles? Yes. Left needle. Right needle. Left needle always have work on it that we're working off of. We don't like right-handed people. I don't know. Losing brain cells rapidly. Take needles. 4-part process, violent. Ready? Okay, you locate your first stitch, right? We said each stitch was each one of these loops, right? First stitch. The first stitch is the hardest one. This first row is the hardest one because you don't have anything to like hold the tension. It's still very loose, so it's quite impossible, okay? Locate first stitch. Ready? First stitch. Now we're gonna go into the stitch. Now, important, not between the stitch, you see? Stitch is a loop, right? You want to go into it, not in between the 2 stitches. This is in between the 2 stitches, right? You see? That's in between the 2 stitches. I want to go in the stitch. We go in the stitch from behind, okay? Step 1, stab it in the butt. Looks like this, you see? In the stitch from behind, stab it in the butt. Step 2, take not tail, evil. Take working yarn. Yes, good. Working yarn. And we strangle counterclockwise around the stabbing needle. Ready? counterclockwise around the stabbing needle, not the main one where the stitches are, around the stabbing one. That creates a loop. Okay? Now we scoop out the guts, which is the loop that we created with that wrap. And now we throw away the body, slide it until the old loop has been discarded and the new loop reigns supreme. New loop, new loop. Okay, again, stab in butt. Asphyxiate counterclockwise the stabbing needle. Scoop out the guts, aka the loop that we just created. Body, dump it. Okay, we keep going. Stab in the butt, wrap, scoop and dump. Stab, wrap, scoop and dump. This is really hard to do when you're like watching through a phone because I can't exactly see what I'm doing. I can like kind of see what I'm doing. Okay, and we have made it to the end of the row. Very good. You are very good at this. I should not make this accent. That country is gonna like save me. So, yes. Anyway, okay. Now we're gonna do the second. We're gonna do the second stitch. But first, I must pause this video because I must upload this one because my phone is gonna run out of space. We're balling on a budget, folks. Okay. So, okay, we'll come back. Okay, we're back. I'm rapidly running out of sunlight, so I'm gonna try to finish this part now. Okay, so we left off, we just knit our first row. Congratulations, you just knit your first row. And now we have to knit our second row, but what I'm going to teach you is how to do this. Okay, you see how, this one's a nicer example. You see how on this side, it's all these tiny little, make focus. Frick. Okay, the light is too low, I think. Okay, you see how on this side, it's all these tiny little V's. Don't focus on my fingers, you dumbass. It's all tiny V's, right? V's, yes. Other side, strange lumps. Why? Because, and up here also, right? These are V's. And then these are strange lumps. It's because knitting is a three-dimensional thing, folks. Wow, incredible. Knitting is a series of loops. You can see here, these V's are actually just looped around each other. You see that right there? It goes whoop, and it loops through what? The next loop, and it loops through the next loop. It's three-dimensional daisy chains. Do you know what a daisy chain is? A daisy chain is like you take a rope or something. It's a good way to like make ropes more compact and strong. You make loop, then you pull in new loop, and 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 you end up with this like thing, which is like, it looks like shit currently. Hold on. It's like a whole bunch of loops that loop through each other, and it's very strong, and I used to do this a lot when I was sailing. Knitting is daisy chains, except not just going in one direction. It's like sideways loop, sideways loop, sideways loop, sideways loop, 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 and then you go up one, and then you loop, 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 and then you go up one and loop again. So that's how it works. But in order to do that, at least if you're knitting, not knitting in the round, like my sweater that I showed you earlier, I'm not going to teach you how to do that yet, because that is slightly changes things. This is a three-dimensional thing. And as you can tell, the fabric has what is known as a right side and wrong side. Right side and wrong side is kind of like a stupid way to call it. But basically, it's like, this is the side that you are meant to show to the world. This is a side that is the nice side. And this is like the backup act. So this is like Britney Spears. And this is Britney Spears' manager and all of her stage hands and her backup dancers and her like backup vocalists and all of that. This is a side that shines. You cannot have it without this side. So when you are knitting flat, as this is known, not there's knitting in the round, there's knitting flat. When you're knitting flat, you must on one side make Britney Spears great, and on the other side make all of her backup act great. So what we just did was the right side. We made the Britney Spears part. And now we have to turn around and make the backup act. So I told you that there were two, well, I told you in my Instagram things. Knitting is a series of zeros and ones. This is all zeros and ones. Okay, and the way that it's done is you make a row of zeros, and then the next row is a row of ones, and then the next row is a row of zeros, and the next row is a row of ones, and and that's how you make this basic fabric with the triangle, the pointies on one side and the bumps on the other. The V's and the bumps. This fabric is known as stockinette fabric. This is the most basic. Like that whole sweater over there is stockinette fabric. If you look at most of your sweaters, they're going to be stockinette. Like go look at a sweater. Find a sweater. Are you wearing a sweater right now? Go look at a sweater. If it is a basic knit sweater, you will see on the one side there will be V's. On the other side there will be bumps. That is a stockinette fabric. And that's what we're learning today. So we have just knit our row of zeros. We will now knit our row of ones, and I know that the light is absolutely fucking dying right now, but I'm going to try my best to show you how to do this. The good news is that it is essentially like knitting the first stitch that we just did, but kind of backwards. So the first stitch that we just learned, annoyingly, is just called a knit stitch. So if someone says knit 13 stitches in a pattern, it says like cast on 12 stitches. Row 1, knit 12 stitches. It means just do the normal knit stitch. Probably on the other side, it'll say like row 2, purl 12 stitches. The purl stitch is basically the opposite of the knit stitch, in that it is the same thing but with a couple of things changed, like the orientation of things. So the first difference is when we were knitting our when we were knitting our knit stitches, we would go in and the yarn, the working yarn would be facing away from us, right? It comes out away from us. We're going to change that. The yarn now is going to come towards us. And it's not that evident why that makes sense on the first stitch, but after the first stitch, it's going to make sense. The second difference is instead of stabbing in the butt, we are stabbing down the throat. So again, we are going through the stitch. God, the light is so bad. We're going through the stitch and not between stitches, but we are going in through the front of the stitch. And importantly, whenever you're doing a knit stitch or a purl stitch, it's on the side of the loop that is towards you. So you see how this loop, there's a side that's on your side of the needle, and then there's a side that's like behind the needle from you. You're not doing it on the behind the needle side. You're doing it all on your side of the needle side. So before we were doing it on going in like on our side of the needle underneath. Now we're going on top on our side of the needle. So your needles will do a little Gangnam style like this, and that's good. And remember, we said that the yarn is not over here, because that would change the way that you're wrapping things, because it would be going underneath. No, the working yarn is facing towards us. But fundamentally it's the same. So we're still stabbing, it's just down the throat, and we're still wrapping, and it's still counterclockwise, it's just the working yarn is on our side now. So we're wrapping counterclockwise around the stabbing needle again. And now we are scooping again, but the scoop goes out the other direction. It goes like flicking away from you. See? And we've picked up the loop that we just made. And then the throwing away the body is still throwing away the body, but it's again kind of like backwards, because it's almost like away from you. And then you pull things snug, and you do it again. And remember, we're keeping the working yarn on our side now. So stab down the throat this time. Take the working yarn, it's towards you. You are wrapping the stabbing needle, strangling the stabbing needle counterclockwise, scooping out the guts away from you this time, and throwing away the body away from you. And so this is called purling, and I'm gonna look not at my phone in order to do this because the light is so low and I can't see shit. Now we are purling. This is making the backup dancers. This is making the management. This is Brittany's costumes. This is Brittany's hair extensions and her makeup artist and her clippers for 2007. This is all of that. The other side is Brittany. So you'll see here, again, very low light, but I'm going to try to show you. These are all bumps. This is the wrong side of the fabric, right? Just like I showed you before. On this side, it's the right side of the fabric. You should be able to see all the little arrows that you're forming. So now you just do them a repeat. Remember the differences. So now you're switching the working yarn back to facing away from you, and you're switching back to stabbing in the butt. So you stab in the butt, you ignore the tail because it's evil, you take the working yarn, it's facing away from you now, not towards you, away from you, and you are continuing. Now, if you were to want to suddenly make a purl stitch in the middle, the way that you make the yarn face away from you is that you rotate it counterclockwise. Don't go around the outside and be like, it's facing me now. No, counterclockwise. And now you would be able to do a purl stitch. Not on the outside, but counterclockwise. But I don't want to do that right now. However, I will show you in a second where that can come in handy. But effectively, to make stockinette fabric, some people call it stockinette stitch, but I think that that's misleading because the stitches are the individual little things that we are doing. There are 8 of these on my needles. Stockinette fabric, but like I said, in order to do stockinette fabric, we do one side is the knit stitches and the other side is the purl stitches. So when you're looking at this now, which I know is barely visible at this point, we see that this side is the V's and this side is the purls. If you put this down and you come back to it and you're like, oh, I have to keep knitting, oh shit, which side am I doing? A good thing to remember is knit the knits and purl the purls. So the knits are the little V's. These are knit stitches. Purl stitches are, ironically, the ones that look like little purls. They look like little bumps, right? So the thing that you do to figure it out is you hold the needle, your working needle in your left hand and your working hand, and you face things towards the right, and you say, what stitch am I looking at? I'm looking at purls. These are the bumps are the purls, right? The purls look like purls. I see purls, therefore I know if it's facing to the right and I see purls, then I have to purl. If it were the other way around and it was like this, and you're like, I see knit stitches, then you are knitting. So now we are purling. And then you would keep doing this. And if you could keep doing this for a really freaking long time, you have a piece of fabric. Like, you are making fabric right now, which to me is the coolest part about knitting, is realizing that you are making a literal fabric that could be used to make literally anything if you really felt like it. Like, you could make yourself an entire knitted tablecloth. I wouldn't recommend it because that would be really difficult to clean. But you could make yourself a blanket. You could make, I don't know, you could make anything. If you can make a car warmer. You can make a protest flag. You can, I don't know, don't do half those things because a car warmer sounds absolutely stupid. But you are making a fabric. And I think that that's part of why knitting is so empowering, is that these days, like, we make nothing ourselves, really. Like, half the food in the United States that one eats is like pre-made and you bought it in a package at Trader Joe's. And, you know, none of our clothes are things that we make. And I don't know, half of the stuff that we do, it's like not like I'm sitting down and I'm like making a clay bowl at work. I'm like writing in Excel. Like, I didn't make this computer, right? I didn't even make this information. I looked up this information on the internet, and the internet told me like what the rate of like vertical transmission of HIV is in Malawi. You know, like, I didn't get that data. So it's really empowering to make something from scratch. So be proud of yourself. Like, you are making a fabric. It's a very small fabric, but soon you'll make a larger fabric. And then I would keep doing this for a while just to practice having what's known as good tension. So good tension is where everything's very neat and even, which you can hardly see anymore, but I have pretty good tension. And also so that you don't make mistakes. So some of the most common mistakes are people making, like when they knit, they accidentally make more than one stitch. That's usually because you wrapped, you strangled too much. You strangled too close to the sun. So, right, I'm seeing a bunch of V's. This is the side that I knit on, right? It's facing towards the right. On my left hand, I see V's, then I'm knitting. Yarn's away from me, stabbing in the butt, and I am knitting. So, for example, one way that you make more stitches on accident is you stab in the butt, you go to wrap, you wrap, you strangled it, and you're like, have I strangled it or not? You strangle it twice, and then you scoop, and then you dispose of the body. See how now we have 2 new stitches in the place of 1? This is not good. This is not what we want. We must undo this. The way that you undo it, I think I'm going to teach you how to do in a bit, but that's one example. And then another one is, and Paul just came home. Hi, Paul, ignore me. Now, another one is where you somehow mess up and you don't actually have it, you don't wrap it successfully, or you do, or whatever, and you just like drop a stitch. And when you drop a stitch, things start getting, you see, unwoven. And there are ways to fix this, but I'm not going to go into this today. So focus on not making extra stitches, not dropping stitches. And if you make a mistake right now, just focus on keeping going. Keep going. Try to make like a length of fabric that doesn't have as many mistakes. And then if you get really frustrated, guess what? You can get to the very end. You can go, this looks like absolute dog shit right now. And you just take out the whole thing and you do what is known as frogging. It is slang for ripping it out, because rib it, frog, and it's satisfying. Okay, it's dark. Paul's home. Paul probably wants food. Paul, get away. Get away from my video. Shut up. Anyway, stop it. Stop. I feel like an antelope at a watering hole. Paul, what are you doing? It's going backwards, Paul. That's not the direction that boats go. Anyway, so that's the basics of knitting. I will teach you how to troubleshoot in a bit, but just try to knit, and I'll make another video soon. Oh my God. What's next? Oh. Okay. I chose him, I guess. So, okay. Happy knitting, and goodbye.